This is the first ever podcast from a talking dude, and in this podcast I would like to talk about the housing issue or the housing crisis in the UK today. Being part of a country, being part of a nation, a key part of that is feeling that you're connected to the country itself. This is England. The land is the foundation of England, and the same with every other Scotland and every other part of Great Britain. And I think you do need to have a connection to the land, and the most obvious way of having a connection to the land is through having the ability to either be able to buy your own home or be able to rent your own home. And these are the two things, the basic kind of the basic ways of being connected to this land are not there for many young people in this country. So I think dealing with this housing problem that we have in this country is absolutely vital for the future of this country. Now, to my mind, the recent general election results, which saw the Conservatives lose their majority and have to rely on the DUP to prop up their government, was in large part a result of people feeling that this country isn't working for them anymore. And one of the key ways in which people are feeling this problem is with regard to housing. And there's nowhere where this is more evident than in London. So I'm reading from an article in the London Evening Standard from Wednesday, the 29th of March 2017, and it's called "Where to Find a Home for London for Less Than £350,000." The financial struggle endured by London's first-time buyers is highlighted in research revealing that the cost of an average first home in the capital has topped £400,000, coming in at an unprecedented £405,106, exclusive Lloyds Bank data shows. It means the sum a first-time buyer requires to secure a foothold on the capital's property ladder has shot up 71% since 2012. The average loan taken out by a first-time buyer in London is £317,253, and they scrape together an average deposit of almost £90,000, despite interest rates at a record low. In 2012, the typical London first-time buyer needed to budget £939 a month to service their mortgage. Today, they need to find £1,386, almost twice the UK average. The cost of a typical first-time home varies hugely across London, with the cheapest in Barking and Dagenham at an average £292,000, while Croydon, Havering and Bexley all come in at under £350,000. But good value locations, I want you to focus on that phrase, good value locations, locations. Good value locations where first-timers concentrate their search have seen the steepest price growth in the last 5 years. The cost of a first-time buy in Olympic boroughs Waltham Forest, Newham and Greenwich has soared by more than 90% since the Olympic Games in 2012. The average first-time mortgage loan in Barking and Dagenham is £241,000. In Havering, Enfield, Bexley and Croydon, it's under £280,000. But in Westminster and Camden, it's £450,000. The housing situation in London is ridiculous. For the overwhelming majority of people in London, you can forget about being able to buy a house. This is not just a London problem. The similar problems are experienced in other parts of the country, all over the country really, particularly in the southeast, but also in the north, the northwest and these kinds of places. So there's a real problem. Now there's a few reasons as to why housing in England and Wales, in the country really, but England and Wales especially, has gone up so much. One of the main problems is, there's been many government policies which have basically helped to artificially fuel demand. And one of the main ones, one of the most recent ones that's, we've heard a lot about recently following the Conservative Party conference is the Help to Buy process. Now, the help to buy is basically a system whereby the government will essentially give an interest-free loan to people in order for them to be able to buy a house. And this, of course, it's positioned as being something that is to help people to buy, but really the overall effect, as we're going to find out in another article that I'm going to read, the overall effect is to fuel prices, is to keep prices up. Now, one of the big reasons for the lack of affordable housing, and particularly the lack of social housing, is right to buy. Now, to be clear, the right to buy council homes wasn't something that was invented by the Conservatives in the 80s. Margaret Thatcher did not invent this. This was something that goes back all the way to the early part of the 20th century. So I believe it's from the 1920s. So when social housing first really became a thing, when councils first started, the state first started really building large scale homes and renting them out, that was where there was a right to buy going all the way back. Conservative and Labour governments and Liberal governments have included this and have supported this. However, it was under the Conservatives in the 1980s that it really was rolled out en masse as a key plank of the policies of the Conservative government. People say that the right to buy basically won them, the general elections that they won, the 4 general elections which they won through the 1980s and early 90s. So let's read a little bit about this whole right to buy situation. The problem with right to buy is that it not only did it come with, not only did it mean that councils were selling off their housing stock, which they were renting out at an affordable price for people who needed it, but they were prevented from being able to build new homes by the legislations put in place by the Conservatives, in particular in the 1980s. So I'm going to read from a Guardian article. The title of the article is "The Housing Crisis will only get worse until England scraps right to buy." Let's read this really insightful article. Quote, "Scotland has already scrapped so-called right-to-buy schemes, and Wales is pushing through reforms to do the same. It's now also time for England to stop allowing council tenants to purchase their homes at discounted prices." The English love of home ownership is well known, which is why, in his party conference speech last week, Chancellor Philip Hammond announced an additional £10 billion to extend the existing Help to Buy scheme for house buyers. Cash windfalls for lucky buyers might win their vote, but the majority must surely recognise that both the right to buy and Help to Buy schemes are economically and morally reprehensible. The disaster in housing supply is increasing social and intergenerational inequality. In London, where housing problems are acute, 27% of residents, that's 2.3 million people, live in poverty, and more than half are in a working family. The capital's recorded homeless population of 170,000 is now more than double that of 5 years ago. Since right to buy was introduced in 1980, 2 million properties have moved into the private sector, and most are simply not being replaced. That's 2 million fewer homes local authorities can use to house those most in need. It's ludicrous to suggest that in a time of crisis we should be selling state-owned homes to those who live in them. It's even more ludicrous to suppose that they should come with a discount, potentially more than £100,000 on the purchase, and retention of any future value uplift. Again, just concentrate on that value uplift, because that's going to come up later on in this podcast. Back to the article. We've inverted an economic rationale that saw local authorities providing almost 30% of the total housing stock as affordable homes in 1980 to only 8% today. In doing so, we've gone from more than 80% of housing subsidies being supply side in 1975 to support the construction of social homes, to more than 85% of subsidies being on the demand side by 2000, helping people to purchase, including the Help to Buy scheme introduced in 2014. The result has been less building and inflated demand, reflecting an expectation that the state should largely withdraw from an active role in housing provision. Though it's delayed until April 2018, the government still remains committed to extending the right to buy to housing associations. Accounting for 9% of total stock, this could double the future impact of the policy. This could also cost the Treasury £5.8 billion a year, money which could be better spent facilitating construction. This is written by someone called Jonathan Manns, who's the Director of Planning at global real estate consultancy Colliers International. Now, the flavour there is very much in favour of state building and state ownership and so forth. And I'm not saying that I'm, all in favour of that kind of thing. If you don't know, I'm much more on the right-hand side of the political spectrum. I'm suspicious of state interference, and I think that as much as possible, we do need people, civil society and the private sector to create and distribute the resources that we need. But I do agree with this article when it's talking about the negative effects of right to buy. In particular, as I said, when you are preventing councils from really being able to use the money that they're getting from selling the homes to build new homes, this is where you're basically, as the article says, you're really spiking, you're limiting supply, which means that you're hoping to inflate the prices. It's a basic supply and demand thing. Now, this is Help to Buy and Right to Buy are big problems, real big problems. The supply of social housing has dwindled right down, and another real big problem as well over the last decade in particular is low interest rates. And this is part of a wider issue in the UK, in Britain really, which is that we're now an economy and in a lot of ways a society which is founded on consumer debt. When you talk about the growth in this country and so forth, or the growth figures and jobs and all this sort of stuff, a load of that comes from consumer debt. Not much of it comes from production, or less and less of it comes from actually producing anything that people want, but more and more of it is about, debt. So housing is one of the biggest, the biggest chunks of consumer debt, of household debt. Low interest rates were brought in particular after the financial crisis of 2007, because what happened basically was, with the crash, there was going to be some problems in the economy, which was going to mean that people were going to be losing their jobs and this, that, and the other. And what the government saw was that if interest rates went up, then a lot of people wouldn't be able to afford the already extortionate mortgage repayments that they were facing. And if that happened, if you don't keep up repayments on your mortgage, then your home could get repossessed. That would be politically suicidal for a government to allow that to happen. So this, Gordon Brown first, and then Cameron and Osborne's government later knew that what they had to do was to keep interest rates low, which means that it was cheap for people. It was the price of borrowing money basically remained as low as possible, meaning that people continued to borrow. That helped to thus also, fuel the economy, the so-called recovery that we've had, all largely built on consumer debt, credit card debt, and all these kinds of things. Politicians wouldn't dare allow house prices to fall long-term because the losers, homeowners and banks, are politically vital. Now, an example of this is the dementia tax, so-called. Remember when the Conservative Party had this idea in their manifesto that, the elderly, if they needed to have social care, then residential social care, then they would get it for free, but they would need to pay for it. It would need to be paid for after they die by, getting some of the money from the sale of their homes. Now, on the face of it, this was a terrible policy. Politically it was terrible because it was basically attacking a constituency of people or a group of people who are the biggest Tory Conservative supporters. But it was also mean-spirited because instead of just coming out and saying, look, people who have got homes need to, it's not fair that people who have got huge equity in their homes, it's not fair for them to be, to be getting subsidised by taxpayers. So something needs to give. Instead of just coming out and saying that, the Conservatives fudged it and tried to kind of sneak it in the back door, wedge it in by starting just on the, on people who potentially would go on to to suffer from dementia and these things. By calling it the dementia tax, whoever came up with that phrase did really well, because I think that was probably the single policy which made the Conservatives lose their majority. Because just to kind of divert briefly, the issue for the Conservatives in the 2017 election wasn't so much to do with the youth that turned in mass to vote for the Labour Party, but a lot of people in a lot of swing constituencies and in places in the southeast of England, which should be the bedrock of Conservative Party support, a lot of them turned to the Labour Party because they were like, well, look, the Conservatives are basically attacking us with things like this dementia tax. And this reflects a wider issue in this country. Housing in this country is nowadays seen largely as a nest egg. Buying a house isn't so much something that people do as a necessity because it's the only way that they can get a home to live in, but rather it's seen as one of the only things worth really investing any money into. Particularly with interest rates being so low, there's hardly any point in saving any money in your bank. So, but with that in mind, housing is property is the thing that basically is seen as a surefire investment that's just going to go up and up and up and up. As a country, actually, we rely on ever-increasing property prices. Depreciating house prices would mean depreciating assets. So for example, if we did have a cataclysmic situation where house prices just plummeted to below the levels they were at, say, 20 years ago, there would be a whole lot of people in this country facing destitution because they would owe more than their homes were worth. So that is the issue here, that all of the parties know that they cannot countenance a situation where house prices slumped in that way. So systematic state policy for decades has been to pump up demand through reduced state building, selling off housing stock, limiting councils' ability to replace housing stock, and as I said, cheap credit. Also other things as well, which I've not talked about, such as the not in my backyard phenomenon, restrictions on home building, such as the Green Belt. You could even say immigration as well, and the influx of foreign capital coming into London to buy up so many of our properties in London. All of these things are, designed to inflate the housing bubble. But the problem is, for everybody now, there are now more losers in this system. Homeowners are becoming a smaller and smaller minority. Back in the day, home owning used to be the norm. And for most people, say over 50, 45, 50, yes, it is still the norm. But for people under 45, and particularly those under 30, people in their 20s and 30s, home ownership is becoming a distant dream. And something has got to give. The Conservatives have come up with their, the pumping up Help to Buy. The Labour Party talks about Help to Buy as well, but they also talk about rent caps and all these kinds of things. But one of the issues that I like the sounds of is to do with land value taxation. And it's not a very sexy sounding thing, is it? Land value taxation. It's not something that's going to get you, cheers, standing ovation in any political party conference, but I think I like the idea of it as a solution to some of these issues. I'm not yet fully in understanding of it, and I'm not fully in full understanding of the ramifications of it and all the different types of it and so forth. But what I want to do now is just spend a little bit of time to give you a flavour of land value tax as I understand it, and to kind of get it out there. I've been wanting to get this out there for months now, and I've been kind of scared away because I don't understand it and I don't want to sound like an idiot. But it's getting to that stage where I've got to say something while I can, So here we go. Land is the key. House prices ultimately are a reflection of land prices. And as I was saying in those articles that I was reading earlier with regard to London in particular, remember we talked about how some locations were more pricey and more in demand than other locations. And this is the point. Desirable locations have desirable land prices. The location is more desirable, which means the location is more expensive. The location ultimately is the land. A plot of empty land in, say, Mayfair or or where even somewhere like King's Cross or somewhere like that, a plot of land, say an acre of land in Mayfair, empty land with nothing on it, just grass, would be much more expensive than an acre of land in say Bromley in southeast London. There's nothing on the land. They've both got the same. They've both got the same planning permissions and whatnot, the Mayfair one would be a lot more expensive because many more people want to buy there or want to be there. So this is the root cause behind property prices. It costs the same to build a house in London as it does to build a house in Sheffield or Doncaster or Belfast for that matter, or Aberdeen. The cost of building a house in all these places is basically the same, but the difference is the location. Now, land is a finite resource. It's outside the normal kind of rules of supply and demand. You can't create more land to meet increased demand. What makes demand go up? Well, largely state activity makes demand go up. Remember in that article we talked about the Olympic boroughs of Newham, Waltham Forest and Greenwich. It said that the prices in those Olympic boroughs has skyrocketed since 2012. Well, why? Because of all of the building that's been taking place in that area since 2012, in around about 2012. And also we're talking about other things such as the Westfield shopping centre there, and the building of the transport links there, the Docklands Light Railway coming into Stratford, the Jubilee line as well over the years. Taxpayers' money essentially raises the value of these locations, but a small group of private individuals reap the benefits through higher property price. I like the idea of land value taxation, whereby as land values go up, the amount of tax that landowners pay also goes up. This revenue can be redistributed back to the taxpayers who generated it in the first place. It could actually claw back the state expenditure on projects such as new train lines, which triggered the uplift in land value. Of course, it's not only the state that invests in these things that makes the land value go up. There's also other things. Westfield, I believe, a lot of that is probably private investment. But the point still is that if I own a house in Stratford and my house price skyrockets because Westfield was built, that wasn't because something I did. It's other people's work, it's other people's investment that's gone into that. The revenues earned from land value tax could also lead to increased investment in house building to ease the problems outlined in this discussion already. I would like to see the spending determined at a local level to give us all a real stake in our communities. A potential benefit of a land value tax is that it would encourage landowners to put their land to productive use. This is how it would help to another way that it would help to lead to increased house building. So on the one hand, a land value tax could be used, the proceeds from a land value tax could be used to build more houses and more affordable homes and so forth. But another way that the land value tax could stimulate home building is through basically making it costly to just have empty plots of land, unproductive plots of land. You have companies and investors who buy land and just leave it empty because they know that the price of the land is going up and up and up and up. They're not paying any rates, any business rates or council tax because they've got no property on it. Whereas with a land value tax, if even the empty plots of land are getting taxed, then that would encourage them to either sell the land to people who are willing to, have got the means and are willing to be able to put it to productive use by building things that will be of use to other people in a market, or they themselves would do this. That these people themselves who have empty land will be stimulated into saying, look, okay, we need to do something. We need to build something that's going to make it worth our while having this land and paying the land value tax. This could stimulate house building and other productive building, which could benefit the local area. And one thing that I really like the idea of is that this could help to regenerate areas which have been in a slump for many years, if not decades. So I'm thinking about, for example, areas in other parts of the country where the land price is much lower than in London could see a regeneration as businesses start to think, you know what? let's move to Sheffield, let's move to Doncaster, let's move to, I don't know, Newcastle, because the land prices there are much, much lower, meaning that we'd pay a much lower land value tax. Hey, let's deal with it. Let's do that. So those are some of the reasons why I like the idea of a land value tax. It's just an introductory kind of conversation, of course, and even in saying these things, I'm thinking of all of these gaps in my understanding and questions and critiques, but I've got to get it out there and start the conversation, And what I want to finish up with is just to point out that this might sound like a radical socialist idea or something like that, but actually most of the political parties out there are now looking at something on the lines of a land value tax. So I'm looking at a website called goldagainstthesoul.wordpress.com from a guy called Paul Knight, at Paul Knight 85, who we follow each other on Twitter, and he's got a couple of really good articles on this website that I've seen so far. I'm sure there's many other articles, but these are just a couple that I've seen. And in one of them, he talks about mentions of land value tax in the general election manifestos in 2017. And I'm going to read from this article to give you a kind of flavour of these. So with regard to the Conservatives, he writes, unsurprisingly, there is no mention of land value tax in the Conservative manifesto. However, there is a commitment to, quote, work with private and public sector house builders to capture the increase in land value created when they build, to reinvest in local infrastructure, essential services and further housing, making it both easier and more certain that public sector landowners and communities themselves benefit from the increase in land value from urban regeneration and development. That's basically one of the rationales for the land value tax there. So that's the Conservatives. The Labour Party, of course, they actually just came out and said they're going to look into it. They said a Labour government will give local government extra funding next year. We will initiate a review into reforming council tax and business rates. Now, I think that's a good idea because the council tax bans are just ridiculous. The fact that someone with a £4 million property will pay the same monetary amount of council tax as someone with a £350,000 property is just outrageous. But anyway, and they also said, and they'll consider new options such as a land value tax to ensure local government has sustainable funding for the long term. Boom. The Lib Dems, they said, their manifesto said, quote, we will also consider the implementation of land value taxation. The Green Party, they're fully on board with this, and they pledged action on empty homes to bring them back into use and a trial of a land value tax to encourage the use of vacant land and reduce speculation. And that's another key thing actually about this, a land value tax, is that a land value tax would work against speculation. Speculation is where you basically buy land or buy properties, basically hoping for the price to go up and up and up so that you can make a killing. But land value taxation obviously it would work against you, because say if you do buy land or a property and you've only bought it because you want to see the property value go up and up and up. If the property value goes up and up and up, then your land value taxation goes up and up and up. So you're penalised. And so hopefully what a land value tax could do is to kind of to disincentivize, if that's a word, to disincentivize speculation. And so those who are looking to buy and invest purely for the purpose of speculation, to see their property values and land values go up, would be penalised. Just in the last few days, the SNP had their conference, and they said that, quote, at our conference, we have debated land reform. We have therefore commissioned the Scottish Land Commission to research the introduction of a land value tax. So all of the main political parties are talking about something on the lines of a land value tax. And in case you're saying, that's because all these parties are basically left-wing and socialist, well, the land value tax was called by Milton Friedman the least worst tax. He was a supporter of a land value tax. Similarly, plenty of people on the right of the political spectrum support the land value tax when you're looking at websites and think tanks and so forth. And again, on the Gold Against the Soul, Gold Against the Soul blog by Paul Knight, he's got an article called Right Wing Support for LVT. I won't read the whole thing, but he lists various people who support land value tax, such as the website Conservatives for Liberty, which is a libertarian website, Adam Smith Institute, the Institute for Economic Affairs, plenty of people. Who else does he talk about here? Yeah, he talks about Christian Niemitz, Adam Lillicoat. Anyway, plenty of people on the right of the political spectrum support a land value tax, as well as plenty of people on the left. And it's an interesting situation that we've got here, where basically a lot of people are agreeing on this idea. So what I want to do, I'm going to stop there. I don't want to babble on too much. This has been my introduction to the idea of a land value tax. I think it's a really promising idea to help to deal with the issue, the problem in this country. And it's a major problem that we have in this country with regard to housing, with regard to the affordability of housing, and with regard to the ability of people to be able to have a stake in the land. Well, thank you for listening. This has been a Talking Dude podcast on the housing crisis, the housing problem. Take care, and I'll chat to you next time.